Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. Hope is important because it can make the present moment less difficult to bear. If we believe that tomorrow will be better, we can bear a hardship today. The Department of English, KSMDB College, welcomes you all to the final day of the online lecture series Theoria 2020 that has brought together eminent personalities from diverse fields of literature, addressing issues from areas like film, theatre, comparative literature, and literary theory, providing the platform for students and faculty to interact and learn from the best minds in the field. Honorable invitees, guests of honor, my dear teachers, non-teaching staff, and dear peers. A very warm good morning to one and all. Today, I, on behalf of the Department of English, KSMDB College, is entrusted with the responsibility of hosting this event, a webinar, Anthropocene, Climate, History, the Rumination of an Aesthete, delivered by Professor P. Harikrishna, former HOD, Department of English, NSS College, Pandalam. It's been a fabulous journey, enlightened by the words of the eminent throughout the lecture series, and today it's yet another fruitful lecture that has taken our enthusiasm up to the brim. But before we begin, let's observe a minute of silence in prayer. Breaking the silence. Now I would like to invite our dear Shankaranarayanan sir, head of our English department, who has always been a guiding force and a motivator for us students, to give the welcome speech.
Hi, good morning. It's my pleasure to extend a cheerful welcome to all of you. Today marks our last day of Theoria 2020 online seminar series. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our principal, Dr. K.S. Anil Kumar, who generously helped us making this event a great success. He is meant to chair this session, but unfortunately, he has informed us that he is not able to attend the function due to certain personal issues. He has been an inspiring presence throughout our seminar series. Even though he is not here now, I, with great love, welcome him to this function. We are going to have an amazing session on anthropocene. Considering this term, anthropocene, I think the news is not good on planet. Is humanity on the threshold of a state shift? Is it anthropocene or capitalocene? Because capitalism is the pivot of today's biospheric crisis. So many questions are there in the air. Instead of a single answer, we want different answers. Today, we have a very special guest, and many of you already know him and might have an acquaintance with him, the former HOD of the Department of English, NSS College, Pandalam, Professor P. Harikrishna. He is one of the most prolific thinkers and a very good teacher who is highly admired and respected by his friends and students. He's a very good friend of mine. What makes him different from other teachers, I believe, is that by using common language with the common people, he makes comprehensible the highly indecipherable jargons and dense prose of criticism. Today, we are waiting for your ruminations, the ruminations of an aesthete. Sir, with love and admiration, I welcome you to this function. A word of appreciation to the seminar committee, especially to the convener, Professor Parvati, my colleagues and students who worked hard to make this event a great success. Once again, I welcome all of you to this function. Thank you.
Now, let us welcome the resource person for today's session, Professor P. Harikrishna, to enlighten us with his lecture on Anthropocene, climate, and history. Over to you, sir.
Hello, Hari sir.
Yes,
പാർവതി
sir.
റേഞ്ചിന്റെ പ്രശ്നമുണ്ടെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു കേട്ടോ. സാറിന് ഹരി സാറിന് റേഞ്ചിന്റെ പ്രോബ്ലം ആണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു.
സാർ ഇപ്പൊ ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യും. റേഞ്ച് വിഷയമാണ്. സാർ ഇപ്പൊ ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യും. Hello, Hari sir.
Fine. Can you see me now?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir.
But the camera is out of focus, I think.
Is it?
Oh, okay, sir.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay.
Did something happen in between? I lost myself for a few minutes.
So I've introduced you, and now we are into the
Okay.
session. Okay.
Shall I begin?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much for having me there. It's always a pleasure to be at DB College. I've always wondered that this higher education department should think of exchanging teachers, and I would have been very happy to work at DB College for a year. What a wonderful landscape, wonderful people. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So I'm very happy. Thank you, Shankarji. Thank you, Sushilji. I think all the former teachers are there. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear students, for calling me. Are you recording this?
Yes, sir.
But I have a suggestion that if you record it, I think you will have to go for a lot of editing, because I plan to make it a little
Okay.
informal and different. As Dr. Sunny would say, I plan to break all conventions of climatology.
No problem, sir. We will edit it. Sir.
Okay, see, one big question that worries every English teacher is what should be the pattern of syllabi? What should be taught in the classroom? What should be the amount of science and other disciplines involved in the study of English language and literature? This is a big problem that has worried teachers always. And I think this essay by Deepesh is a little problematic for the classroom, but very enjoyable to be read otherwise. So I plan to do a reparative reading. Reparative reading is a type of reading where you don't indict anything, you don't condemn anything. Instead, you try to give new life, you try to replenish, you try to give a new sort of energy and perspective to what things you are reading. It may be theory, it may be fiction, it may be essays, whatever it is. A reparative reading, I believe, can blow some light into any text. That is what I plan to do today. I plan to bring in a little bit of aesthetics into the reading of Deepesh Chakravarti by mixing aesthetics as an aesthete into the reading of Deepesh Chakravarti. Now, I'll begin with an old story because this is basically about history also. Histories are about stories. This is a very curious story. Some years back, we had a national seminar at Pandalam NSS College on epistemology. And it was going to be inaugurated by the then VC, Dr. Jayakrishan. So our principal was very ready with the speech. He was a zoology teacher, but he had worked a lot on this epistemology. He had a ready-made speech. But when the VC arrived, he said, before the presidential address, I would like to make my inaugural address and leave because I'm in a hurry. Fine. And the VC spoke for half an hour. He began with Aristotle and he ran through all the Western philosophers, touched epistemology and wonderful speech. So I was sitting near the principal and the principal very softly told me in my ears, Hari, I'm not speaking again. I asked, why, sir? Because he has used the same sight which I also had. So he has exhausted all the material which I plan to say. So when I begin talking to you, I'm in a similar position. Just imagine people like Professor Sanu and Sachidanandan have already spoken. And then I come. I know it's very cunning. DB College wants to begin the program with a big bang and end it with a whimper. So that's a big problem for me. See, I have typed a room. It is not pondering. It is not meditation. It is not brooding. It is not reflection. I have put the rumination. Because, you know, Derrida, although he wrote these complex, sophisticated essays, he also wrote essays on trivia. There is essays on gifts, essays on hospitality, etc. And he also has some wonderful ideas on the use of proper nouns. For example, when he mentions James Joyce, he plays with the word Joyce and he says the amount of joy that James Joyce brings out. So, in order to initiate this discussion, I have purposefully selected the word rumination so that I could link this word rumination with the Persian poet Rumi. It has been translated into almost every language in the world. Most of his ghazals are very famous, especially his ghazal number 163 is very famous. And I would like to begin this session by quoting small 3 lines of Rumi. 1. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. Quote number 2. Be melting snow. Wash yourself of yourself. Be melting snow. Wash yourself of yourself. And the third, let the waters settle and you will see the moon and the stars mirrored in your own being. Let the waters settle and you will see the moon and the stars mirrored in your own being. Now, these are beautiful couplets which directly or indirectly speak about the world, the planet, the universe, the beauty which the universe provides, how you can see beauty even in very small and minute things, etc., etc. And a literature teacher talking to his English students cannot ignore Shakespeare. So I have another quote from Shakespeare. This is from As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 1. Very famous lines, you know. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. I would not change it. So this is my policy. Whatever science enters into the pantheon of literature and we should be able to endorse it with a slice of the literary. I have 2 more quotes before I go on. The next is a quote from the famous Latin American writer Borges. The quote is, I imagined a labyrinth of labyrinths, one sinuous spreading labyrinth that would encompass the past and the future and in some way involve the stars. And the next is a quotation from Jonathan Bate, the famous eco-critic. In his famous work, The Song of the Earth, he has a small review on the famous poem of Wallace Stevens. And he writes, as you read the poem, hold in your mind's eye a photograph of the earth taken from space, green and blue, smudged with the motion of cloud, so small in the surrounding darkness that you could imagine cupping it with your hands. A planet that is fragile, a planet of which we are a part, but which we do not possess. And the third is the cover of a book. It is a translation of the works of Kalidasa, and it is titled The Loom of Time. The Loom of Time. It is a translation of all the famous works of Kalidasa, including Meghasandesham, Rijusamharam, etc. And look at the title, The Loom of Time. The loom has two meanings. One is the loom which brings together the thread to create a fabric. And the loom also means something that is so vast that it looks very indistinct and invisible to you. When you discuss the climate, when you discuss the Anthropocene, if you have a foundation of the literary, if you have a foundation of the aesthetic, it becomes a magic carpet. You can journey to any part of the planet. You can go to any part, era, or the epoch, but you can sit on this magic carpet. When I was a student in the mid 80s, we used to frequent the university library. And very strange that one book, one small blue book that sat amidst the literary works, was a work called What is History by a person called E.H. Carr. So as students, we would just, because it's very interesting, blue cover and white alphabets, it's written What is History. And we would all often take it, renew it for 3 or 4 times, keep it with us, and won't read it. But then one day, someone said, someone who was very left oriented, that this E.H. Carr is a big fake. So we asked him why, and then we decided to read the book. The problem that my friend had discovered was that E.H. Carr was actually blaming Marx. He was arguing that Marx and his concept of class struggle, etc., is mere gimmick. It does not hold water. But what happened many, many years later is that he confesses that he made an error. He made a mistake. Because at that time, he was writing about Soviet history and he was planning to publish a book on the Russian writer Bakunin. And the publishers wanted him to do something like this. And that is why he brought out this book, What is History? In that work, he speaks about history as a fish market where you select, you prioritize things, etc., etc. And in the 80s, another thing was very important in the humanities. The concept called new science was slowly entering into the humanities. Writers like Fridtjof Capra, his Tao of Physics, Robert Pirsig, with his The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Carlos Castaneda, with his quasi-scientific writing, Gary Zukov, with his Dancing Woolly Masters. So, a host of writers were creating an intersectional ambience where you have the humanities and the arts merging with the sciences in a very soft, subtle way. In Malayalam literature also, in those times, you had writers like Asha Menon and Medil Radhakrishnan, and in fact, Nitya Chaitanya Yadi. Their writings also reflected the impact of this new science. In fact, Frigytov Capro's book, The Uncommon Wisdom, has passages where he mixes the science with spirituality. He speaks about how he was walking on the beach and he happened to use a special camera, and the photograph showed the image of Om on the beach, etc., etc. So science and humanities were getting very close. A writer like Colin Wilson, in his famous work, The Occult, he also works like the mysteries. In The Occult, he makes a very strange argument. He says Gautama Buddha got enlightenment because he sat under the banyan tree. If he was sitting under some other tree, he would not have gone this. And he uses a quasi-scientific argument. He argues that the banyan trees have figs hanging from it to the floor. And these figs contain large amount of a chemical called serotonin. And we all know, all science students know, zoology students know, that our brain gets invigorated when this serotonin, a chemical called serotonin, acts upon the pineal glands inside the brain. Very strange argument. Looks like fake science. But always, all through history, you had this link between the arts, the humanities, and science. Whenever there was a binary between science and the humanities, there was a problem. For example, the Victorian period. Matthew Arnold writes, we are like armies clashing at night. There was conflict between science and whenever there's a binary, there's a problem. But whenever there is an intersectionality, a merging, an overlapping, it creates an ambience of discussion, dialectics, liberation, etc. So there's no problem in having science in the English classrooms. In the 80s, in Malayalam poetry, there was a group of poets who were labeled as a Marakavigal because they were writing poems in favor of nature, etc. The Silent Valley issue was looming large in the horizon. There were issues. And you had writers like ONV, Kadaminita, Sugadagumari, Ayyappa Panikar, all writing poems about nature. And one of the books, essay books that was published by Vishnu Narayanan Nambudiri sir was titled Kavidayude DNA. In ONV's Bhumikku Charamageetham, you have this wonderful line. കവിതയുടെ നെറുകയിലെ മഞ്ഞുനീർത്തുള്ളിയിൽ പോലും ഒരു കുഞ്ഞു സൂര്യനുണ്ട്. അത് കണ്ടുദിച്ചിതൻ കരളിൽ ഒരു വിസ്മയ വിഭാതം. So knowingly or unknowingly, you have the elements of botany, elements of physics, reflection, the universe, all this coming into poetry. So the science was always there in the humanities. Perhaps not very technical, etc., etc. Now, because I can't see your whether you are having a sheet over your head. Unmute themselves and give back.
Excuse me, sir. There is some connectivity issue, I think. It's not audible now.
Yeah, I'll come back. Relax. I'll come back. Him.
Some connectivity issues are there. He will join very soon. Okay.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now we can hear.
See, I'm very sorry
Hey,
that this is happening.
no.
In fact, I in fact took an additional geo connection also just for this because I was afraid that this connection would have a problem because of this electricity board people. So I think we will work on from now. Now, Shankarji.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay, is everyone fine? Should I bring in some change or is it okay going fine?
Okay, fine, fine. Well and good. Okay, sir.
Okay. Okay. Please tell Parvati or someone that if they want to make any interference, they can just call me on my mobile.
Oh, okay, sir. Okay,
All,
sir.
all, okay. So in case I need to bring in some change, I'll do that.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, what I propose to do is I hope or plan to bring in the element of aesthetics into this talk. There's a Latin proverb which was later used by J.S. Mill in his A System of Logic. He says, we never really know what a thing is unless we are able to give a sufficient account of its opposite. That means you will not understand a thing until you know what is opposite to that thing, what is contrary to that thing. So these are the opening points of aesthetics. Number two, the famous Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant. He says, in his Political Reason, Critique of Political Reason, he says, on a clear night, the noblest spectacle mystified by the expanse, an unbounded magnitude of worlds, systems of systems, limitless times of their periodic motion, their beginnings and continuance. He speaks about the universe. Now I'm bringing in two aesthetic theoreticians. One is Noel Carroll, Carrol, Noel Carroll. He is famous for his arousal model theory, where he argues that anything in nature becomes appreciative only when it is able to provide an element of arousal in the spectator. For example, when you watch a waterfall, or when you walk barefoot over dry leaves, you enter into a zone where you are aroused and you are able or capable of understanding, amalgamating, absorbing any beauty that is present over there. That's Noel Carroll's The Arousal Model. Then you have Stan Gadlovich, Gadlovich, Stan Gadlovich, his mystery model. He says, real beauty or the duty of the aesthetician is to appreciate the incomprehensible. You should be able to understand things that are very complex, which is not easy to understand. That is a quality of aesthetics, and he calls it the mystery model. And it is totally against natural science, which becomes very important in the essay. Now, there's a thinker called George Birkhoff, Birkoff. Birkhoff makes a very strange argument where he says beauty is measurable. And he has an equation like E is equal to mc squared. He says m is equal to O by C, where m is aesthetic measure, O is order, and C is complexity. So m is equal to O by C, aesthetic measure, order, and complexity. So when you look at the planet, when you look at the earth, will you be able to apply all these things? Because aesthetics, I told you earlier, is dialectical and liberatory. It liberates you, frees you. And Terry Eagleton has this beautiful line where he says, engaging in aesthetics is the escape from tyranny of theory. I was watching one of the interviews by Devesh Chakravarti, where he himself admits that one big problem in the discussions of the Anthropocene has been the vast or large amounts of theory put into it. And knowingly or unknowingly, a binary between the humanities and literature has slowly evolved. So I told you the opposites of beauty are the opposites of beauty. If you want to know something, you should know its opposite. And the opposites are: one, the ugly; two, the meaningless; three, the kitsch, K-I-T-S-C-H. Kitsch means cheap and glossy; four, the boring; five, the insignificant; and six, the irrelevant. So when you look at the universe, when you look at the planet, when you look at the climate, do you feel any of this? Do you feel that it is against beauty? Do you feel that it is standing anti to beauty? Now, why did I choose this aesthetics with Deepesh and his essay? Because please look or think for a moment. Don't you think that this whole concept of the Anthropocene and the scenes coming before that are truly dystopic, frightening? I'll give you a small example. I know it's a little bit boring, but just think of the Cenozoic period, Cenozoic, Cenozoic period, which is divided into three periods. The Paleogene, where you have the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. That means dinosaurs that could not fly became extinct during that period. And it happened 66 million years ago. Can you imagine that? 66 million years ago. It's frightening. It's dystopian. And an era itself is defined as several millions of years. Now, this Paleogene has three epochs. One is called the Paleocene. What is the speciality of the Paleocene? It lasted for 60 million years. And it is a period where the modern placental mammals originated, and the jungles were formed, and the sharks came into being. How much? 60 million years. Truly frightening, intriguing, and therefore dystopian. The second is the Eocene, E-O-C-E-N-E, Eocene. 33 million years ago. And look, during this period, you had mammals that weighed less than 10 kg, 10 kilos. But there were huge birds, and the temperature was 30 degrees Celsius, and the seasons and the growth of grass is supposed to have started during this period. The third is the Oligocene, O-L-I-G-O-C-E-N-E, Oligocene, 25 million years ago, where you have grass, elephants, cats, dogs, and plants. The first was the Cenozoic, then the Paleozoic had three parts. The second is the Neogene. It was 3 million years ago. It has two epochs: the Miocene, which is 23 million years ago, where you have grass and apes and seed plants. Then you have the Pliocene, where you had tremendous climatic change, and you have the deserts coming The dividing part, the Pleistocene, 1,700 years ago. Mind bloggers.
Excuse me, sir. Again, the same problem, sir. It's not audible enough. So can you hear me, sir? Please.
Again, there is some problem with the connectivity, I think, sir.
Yeah, it's not audible enough.
How is it now?
Yes, sir, it's clear now.
My God, what's happening now? I'm shifting between the two feeders. One is Geo and the other is Asianet. What's
Now
happening?
it's clear.
No. What was the last thing, Parvati, I said?
Sir?
What is the last thing I said? You heard? Did you hear what I said about the Pleistocene?
No, sir. No, sir.
No, sir, no, sir.
No, did you hear the Miocene?
Sir, you were talking about Homer. You mentioned about Homer.
Oh.
No.
No.
No, sir.
Parvati, where were
So
you?
no, sir, no, sir, it was not clear.
No,
About
okay, fine. Just tell me.
the three divisions, the three eras.
Okay. In order to reach the Anthropocene, I'll just have to. So I reached the fourth stage, but I'll just start again. See, I was now just tell me in between whether you can hear me. See, I was trying to make an argument that the sense of time, or what you call the geological time or deep time, it's unbelievably complex, it is frightening, and it is dystopian. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And I said, just look at the periods or epochs or eras in this geological period. The Cenozoic period has three sections. One is the Paleogene. I'll run now because I said all that. One is the Paleogene, where you have the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. That means dinosaurs that could not fly. And this happened 66 million years ago. And the Paleogene has three epochs. One is the Paleocene, which lasted for 60 million years, and you have the modern placental mammals originating during this period, the jungles and the sharks coming. The second is the Eocene, which is 33 million years ago, where you have mammals under 10 kgs weight, small, huge birds, and the temperature was around 30 degrees Celsius. And then you have the Oligocene, where it happened 25 million years ago, where you had grass and elephants and cats and dogs and plants. The second part is the Neogene, which happened 3 million years ago, where you have the Miocene, 23 million years ago, where you had grass and apes and seed plants. The Pliocene, 2.58 million years ago, plenty of climate changes. You have the coming of the flora and the fauna, monsoons, deserts, and water bodies and great lakes. Then you have the two epochs almost near to Anthropocene, which is called the Pleistocene, which ended 11,700 years ago. You had the ice ages, the deserts, and the Homo sapiens coming during the Pleistocene. And then you have the Holocene, which many people believe we are living now. Mind you, this Anthropocene, the usage Anthropocene has not been agreed upon by all scientists. It has in fact been put forward by different groups of scientists to the geological groups in UK and USA, but nothing has come out official. So we are still living in the Holocene age, which began 11,700 years ago. And during this period, there were many extinctions, which is called the sixth extinction. Many extinctions all through these ages and serious extinctions during this period. In fact, 322 species is supposed to have gone extinct during this period. You had the Industrial Revolution taking place during this period. After 1900, it is believed that 500 or more vertebrate species became extinct. Continents have shifted apart. The division of South and North America has taken place. India, Asia, and Himalayas have been compartmentalized. Congo, Nile, and the Niger have shifted ways and parts. During this period, there was a very hot period, and then there was a cooling period. And now people argue that from 1700 or 1750 onwards, you can argue that a new era or a new epoch has started, which is called the Anthropocene. The word Anthropocene simply means a period where the human, becomes the most dominant determining factor in the universe. He has this capacity to determine the world, dominate the world, take decisions for the world, etc., etc. Now, you have all heard of the thinker Yuval Harari, who is famous for his work Homo sapiens. Now, he has this wonderful argument. He says the humans are able to achieve all this is because of their capacity for flexible collectivity. They can join together, they can come together, they can form. He has this wonderful example. If you take 1,000 chimpanzees and put them in the Wembley Stadium, there would be chaos. There would be confusion. But if you put 40,000 people inside the Wembley Stadium, nothing would happen. They would all sit together. So this capacity for collectivity is very important in human beings, and therefore he has created this period called the Anthropocene, where he is very dominant to the extent that he has the capacity to change the world, not just the world through its materiality, but also through its climate. So this is the essence of the essay which Deepesh Chakravarti is trying to put forward, that the Anthropocene period or age is the age in which you have the humans dominating the planet. Now, Romila Thapar has a wonderful argument that the historian is a detective. He's always looking out for clues. He's always looking out for sources. Now, I just want you to look broadly at the essay before entering into the essay proper. I just want you to look at the amount of sources that Deepesh has used. So in the classroom, it becomes terribly problematic. He begins with Alan Weisman, he goes on to Bailey, then he comes to Arrhenius, then he comes to Jane Hansen, then he goes to Naomi Oreskes, R.G. Collingwood, Vico, Hobbes, Croce, Carr, Brodel, Gadamer, Crosby, Bruno Latour, Jeffrey Sachs, Mel McKibben, Amartya Sen, Derrida, Deleuze, Kenneth Pomeranz, Ashish Kothari, E.P. Thompson, and Foucault. So the amount of sources and references that Deepesh Chakravarti has made in this essay is tremendous. Before going into the essay proper, I'll just make a very curious comment also. We believe that by 1750, 1700, the Anthropocene started off. Now, I'm making an argument. I may be wrong. I believe that art and literature and architecture after the coming of the Anthropocene has also started showing some tendencies. Now, look at painting before 1700. Look at the paintings of Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Botticelli and Hieronymus Bosch. Are they the same as Picasso and Magritte and Van Gogh? They come during the Anthropocene, the others come before that. Look at architecture. Before the Anthropocene, you had the pyramids and the Sistine Chapel and the statue of David. But after the coming of the Anthropocene, you have the architecture of Venturi, you have the Eiffel Tower and the Rashomon Mountains, etc. Music. Earlier you had Wagner and Mozart. Now you had the kitchen orchestra of John Cage. Look at writers. Before Anthropocene, you have Shakespeare and Homer. After the Anthropocene, you have Joyce and Marquis. And I would stop this section by arguing that the Romantic poetry or the Romantic period English literature is actually the resistance period to the Anthropocene. During the Anthropocene, there is no possibility of having a romantic ambience, romantic literature. And therefore, we can also look at the visuals outside. Look at cinema. I'll come to cinema last, but just look at the visuals of the Anthropocene. Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Joker, Terminator, zombies. All these are images of the Anthropocene. So, see, I just wanted to bring in the element of aesthetics by understanding its opposite, what happens later. Now I'll come to the essay proper. Parvati, can you hear me? No, do you want me to do something different?
Yes, sir.
Or,
Yes, sir.
lessen my speed?
No, sir.
Lessen
It's
my
quite all
speed
right.
or something? No.
No, sir. No, sir. It's perfectly all right.
Don't use the word perfect.
Sir.
Okay. Now is Sushil there? Hello? Hello? Has the connection gone again?
No, sir. No, sir. Sushil,
No, is
sir, I
Dr.
think,
Sushil there?
no, sir. I think he is not here.
No,
Yes, sir.
that's
He's
the,
there. Sushil, sir, please unmute your microphone, please. Sushil, sir. Sushil, sir, please unmute your microphone. Hello, Sushil, sir. Can you hear me?
okay, don't bother. No, I heard his sweet voice in the morning. I just wanted to know whether he had left or he is still bearing with me. Okay, Parvati, don't bother. I'll continue.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Now, as in your classrooms, you've already discussed, but as part of the schedule, I'll just go. Now, the term Anthropocene, which is a combination of the term man and new. So, new age where man dominates. You know that the term was coined by the American biologist Eugene Stomer, Stoermer Stomer, and the Dutch geochemist Paul Crutzen in 2000. It was in an essay they published, and the simplest definition is that the Anthropocene is a geological epoch, not an era. Era is millions of years. A epoch dominated by human activities at all scales, everywhere on the planet. The human influence is so very strong. And these changes or activities of human beings have created changes in the planet's atmosphere, especially through fossil burning. So this is the sum and substance of the essay. Now, what are we going to do about it? Now, Deepesh Chakravarti has this essay with an introduction and 4 theses. Now, I think as students and teachers, it is our duty to take upon this thesis, to expand it to an antithesis, and reach a synthesis, which is very conventional, I know. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Or you can use the post-structuralist Derridian approach by deconstructing the essay, by laying it bare, and finally understanding that you cannot find a solution to this. So these are the 2 ways of reading this essay. So this essay begins I have a copy of the essay with me. I'll just keep it in case you want to make any. So this essay begins by mentioning the planetary crisis. And Deepesh Chakravarti is very worried that one of the biggest problems this planetary crisis is facing is that there are various responses to this crisis, and most of them are indifferent. There is an element of indifference to this, or there is an element of activism. So 2 points. Many viewpoints are taking place in relation to this climate change, in relation to the coming of the Anthropocene. One is the indifference towards this. That means this is not going to happen to me. What scientists would use another term to argue this, the bystander effect. You are just a bystander. It's not going to happen to me. You are just a bystander, just a witness to this. So that is a very dangerous response according to Deepesh Chakravarti. And the other is activism. You are hyperactive. You form associations, you form NGO groups, etc., and you are fighting against this. So that's the starting point of this essay. There are various responses to this planetary crisis. And then he takes the famous work of Alan Weisman, W-E-I-S-M-A-N, Alan Weisman, who wrote the famous book, The World Without Us, in 2007, where he engages in a thought game. It's a game, it's a thought game, where he wants everybody to imagine a world without the humans. He takes the example of the New York City, and he wants us to imagine New York without human beings. I think 20th Century Fox has taken the rights of the book. It may come as I'm not sure whether it has already been filmed, but it might come as a film. And there is probably every chance that it's going to be a frightening experience. It's going to be traumatic. But Weisman is of the opinion it's more than frightening, it's intriguing. How are we going to face it? What's going to happen? And he says, I'm not saying everything, but he says a few things that may happen are that the drains and the subways would become flooded because there's no pumping. And the water would start entering into the foundations and concretes. And the birds flying by, the bird droppings would fall into the water, and it would start growing, and the trees would go from under the earth, and it would start breaking up the buildings. It's a frightening experience. So he wants us to think or take this as a thought experience, thought experiment, and try to think. It's an intriguing thought, but a very interesting book, The World Without Us, published in 2007 by Alan Weisman. If all humans vanish, what will happen? Will the world or New York become a forest without human beings? Will we be missed? Will the human beings not being there, will that become a big news? Will we be missed? That's a question Deepesh asks. And he says, history speaks of continuous human experience. See, the entry of history into climate, into planet. Now, can you just pause for a moment and think, up to 1980, have you ever read in anthropology or sociology or literature or any of the humanities disciplines, have you seen focused writing on climate change? Focused writing on climate change and its linkage to history? Have you seen any sort of writing? No. It's only after the 1980s that this sort of writing has become very, very relevant and important. People started thinking very seriously about these issues. And what Weisman does through this work is that he problematizes the historical sense that history is something continuous, it is linear, it is a story of people and places, etc., etc. He problematizes this whole issue through this thought experiment. And he begins his argument by saying, global warming, as everyone knows, is basically because of the greenhouse gases caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, you all know. The dead animals and trees that were buried for millions of years under the earth, they are mined and extracted as oil, petroleum, coal, etc. And they are burned by people for their uses. And this is called fossil fuel. And this creates plenty of greenhouse gases, and that he begins the argument by saying this causes all the problems. Then he raises a question. What is human history? And who is the historian? What is human history and who is the historian? Now, we always have this cliche dialogue which says history is written by the victors. Everyone knows who overthrew Kalinga and won the battle and later took Buddhism, etc. Everyone knows, but no one knows who ruled Kalinga during the time it was plundered. So history has certain cliches. So who is a historian and what is human history? Two questions he raises at the start. And he says, various scientists have ideas on climate change. But most of these ideas challenge the humans and the historians because they do not take into account the process of decolonization and globalization. These two things have been landmarks in the history of the Anthropocene, but rarely it is discussed very seriously. And he says, global warming studies had already started in the 1890s by the Swedish Svante Arnim, Svantearrnheim, Svante Arnim. He had already said about the 1890s global warming. But it became serious only by 2000 when James Hansen spoke at the NASA in USA and said that it is real and it is here to stay. But mind you, when planetary crisis is discussed, when climate issues are discussed, these politicians are not at all serious about it. And Deepesh Chakrabarty mentions an issue where he said, when people spoke about the climate change and the greenhouse effect, etc., the then president of America, George Bush, he had this very sarcastic answer. He said, no problem, we will read it, we will deal with it with the White House effect. The greenhouse effect would be dealt with the White House effect. So sarcastic was that. But people started thinking seriously about this because of certain happenings. What are the happenings? One, the drought in Australia, cyclones in many parts of the world, bushfires in Canberra. And it's very important that Deepesh Chakrabarty himself has agreed that he was initiated into this science. He's not a scientist. He's a humanities academician, but he was initiated into the science and climate and planetary changes, etc., while he went to Australia and he saw the bushfires of Canberra. A beautiful place. He was going there from Calcutta and he was shocked to see these bushfires. And that triggered this thought in him. So the bushfires in Canberra, crop failure in many parts of the world, the Himalayan melting, acidity in the sea, extinction of many species, and the population growth. All these things together made people believe that here was something called the climate change and therefore the coming of the Anthropocene. But Deepesh himself agrees that studies on various issues were taking place, but nothing serious was taking place on studies focusing basically on the planetary issues. He says most of the studies were focusing on the problems of capitalism. This is one main part of the essay. Everybody was writing about capitalism and everybody was of the argument that the real problem of the Anthropocene, if there is one, if there is something called the coming of the Anthropocene, the real problem is capitalism, and everyone was writing about capitalism, the coming of globalization, the coming of liberalism, all this, etc., etc. Some people were intelligent enough to understand that there was a overlapping between